Hello, my name is Melissa Bungie, and this is my video on encouraging the heart with inclusive leadership. I am a second and third grade teacher in a diverse school, and so I focus my presentation on inclusive leadership in that setting. The first video that I watched was called How to Fix a Broken School, Lead Fearlessly, Love Hard. And this was a TED Talk by Linda Cleate Wayman. Linda is the principal of Strawberry Mansion High School in Philadelphia, which, when she arrived, was labeled as low-performing and persistently dangerous. When she arrived, she was the fourth principal there in 4 years. Her students had low test scores, and they didn't feel safe at school. There was drug use on campus. There were students bringing weapons to school. There were frequent assaults. So many students didn't even come to school because they felt so unsafe, and teachers were equally afraid. And because of this, they had very low expectations for their students. Linda said the teachers were unaware of how their attitude was, how detrimental it was to the school's culture. So she came up with 3 slogans that she tried to live by as a principal and that she repeated over and over to her staff. And the first one was, if you're going to lead, lead. As the principal, Linda felt responsible for the success of the school, and she knew that she needed to step up and really do her job effectively if any change was going to happen. So she committed to really doing her job, and not delegating her work, not hiding in her office, but tackling any challenges that arose. So she developed a leadership team, and together with them, they cleaned out the school, they fixed the budget, they changed the schedule to offer better classes that met their students' needs and to allow time for students to meet with counselors. They scheduled a plan for the support staff so that their time was being utilized effectively, and they created a non-negotiable behavior plan, which led to their school being removed from the persistently dangerous list in her first year as principal. She also had the slogan, so what, now what? And this came from the fact that many of her students came from single-parent homes. Many of her students had parents who were incarcerated. Some of them had been in prison themselves. There was a lot of teenage pregnancy. There was 39% of students had special needs. Only 6% of her kids were proficient in algebra. Only 10% were proficient in literature. And a lot of teachers and students and people in the community looked at all of this and said, there's no hope for these kids. But instead of having that attitude, Linda said, so what, now what are we going to do about this? She didn't ignore the challenges her students faced at home, but instead she realized, well, if these are the backgrounds they come from, we need to find a way to change what we're doing so that they can be successful. So she provided a lot of mandatory professional development for her teachers, where they focused on differentiation and small group instruction, and this led to an immediate increase in test scores. They saw 107% growth in algebra and 112% growth in literature. Her final slogan was, if nobody told you they loved you today, you remember that I do, and I always will. She really did love her kids and believed in them unconditionally. She grew up in a similar setting, and she was able to achieve, and so she wanted that for them as well. She managed the lunchroom so that she would have time to sing happy birthday to kids and to sit and talk to them. And she also held monthly town hall meetings where all the kids could come and ask questions of her that she would answer really honestly. And with her high expectations and the love that she showed her students, they really did begin to flourish. So this is definitely a video that I would recommend to anyone. The second video I watched was called How a Great Leader Motivates, and this was narrated by Pedro Noguera. He was asked how a great leader motivates, and he spent the video talking about a principal. He never named this principal, but said that she, even though she was only 34 years old, and in a school where over 40% of her students were homeless, she was able to have a very high-performing school. She was able to do this by training her secretary to do most of the administrative jobs that a principal normally does, and then act mainly as a lead teacher instead of someone bogged down with paperwork. So she spent a lot of her time, the majority of her time, in the classroom with teachers, mentoring them, coaching them, creating an environment where they felt safe to get help from her, and she would model lessons for them, and she would step up and step in when a teacher needed help, or there was a particular student who needed additional support. She would be there for that student. When Pedro asked, well, how do you get along with the unions? She was like, oh, let me come introduce you to my union representative. And she, instead of feeling at odds with the union, she really found a shared vision that they both had, which was that their teachers were supported enough to do their jobs effectively, and used that to create an environment where constructive things could happen instead of just negativity and combat. And she also was able to encourage the heart by really finding a place for all of her staff to succeed, and acknowledging their success. In New York, where she worked, they have something called rubber rooms, because of the union power in that state. It's very difficult to fire a teacher who has tenure, even if they're not effective. And so what happens a lot of times is, instead of going through the effort and spending the money to get rid of a bad teacher, they will pay the teacher to sit in a room and do nothing. And this principal actually went into one of those rubber rooms, found a teacher whose previous administrator really decided was worthless, and she found a job that he could do really effectively. And Pedro said he actually witnessed this man acting as a counselor and helping a student who was a behavior problem work on his behavior, and it seemed like the student was really making great progress, and the teacher, instead of just wasting away in the rubber room, had found a place where he could legitimately make a difference again. And while my videos focused on principals, I think that teachers also can and should apply these inclusive leadership ideas, and as a teacher, that's something that I really strive to do. One of the ways that I think teachers can and really should do this is by seeing potential in all of their students, and not only seeing the potential, but communicating this potential to parents, to coworkers, and to the students themselves, so that they're able to believe in this potential as well. This involves really modeling the way. If I believe in my students, that's not something I can just lock up inside of myself, but I need to share that belief with students, with parents, with coworkers, and then also act in a way that's in line with that. So if I believe that my students can really rise to high expectations, I can't be giving them remedial work to do, and I can't be just kind of going through the motions of doing my job. I really need to be challenging my kids every day. And then also inspiring a shared vision is a part of this. So something that I do in my classroom is, instead of calling kids students, I call them scholars. I explain to them at the beginning of the year what it means to be a scholar in our classroom, and that it means you have a dream for your life, and you're excited about school because it's going to help you reach your dreams. So you're committed to working hard, and you're not at school because you have to be there, but because you want to be there. And so we have a lot of conversations throughout the year about how a scholar would respond in different situations. And by using this shared language, it really creates a culture in my classroom of we can succeed, we want to succeed, we're at school to succeed. And then communicating that to the parents is also really important. I had one of my parents at a parent-teacher conference talking about how excited he was that his nephew was able to take advanced placement classes in high school. And when I told him that I totally believed in that for his son as well, his eyes filled with tears, because this parent hadn't had those opportunities himself, and so it wasn't in his mind a given for his child to be able to achieve in that way. And so to hear someone else believe in him and to show him that I shared a vision with him was really powerful for both of us. Something else that's super important for an inclusive teacher leader is to hold students to high and consistent expectations, while at the same time ensuring them of unconditional love. So this is going to challenge the process because students students from diverse settings, especially where I teach, where about half of my students' parents don't speak English, and the students come from homes where they don't ever speak English at home, they're not going to learn in the same way that a student who came from the place I came from did. When my parents were college educated and spoke my language and read to me in English every day and took me to museums on the weekends, I'm going to have to teach my students in a different way than I was taught. And I'm not just going to be able to follow the curriculum without making dramatic changes to meet my students' needs. And I also want to create a culture in my room that enables others to act, that allows my students to feel safe enough to try. So I work really hard to show them that even though we want them to succeed, failure, mistakes are a part of learning. And it doesn't mean they're not smart, it doesn't mean they won't succeed, but it's something that we will face every day. So I say things a lot like hard things are good for your brain, and students, that's become kind of a slogan in our classroom. So when somebody complains about something being hard, other kids will start to say that, but that's good for you, so that they don't feel stupid when something is challenging them, but they realize that the challenge is going to help them grow. And you'll also have to encourage the heart of your students by recognizing the successes that they do have. You have to be aware that this is a marathon and not a sprint. And so if a student gets a F on a test and then the next week gets a C on the test, even though it's not an A yet, the student has made some great success, and that success needs to be celebrated for a student to be willing to continue their efforts. There are a lot of challenges involved with being an inclusive teacher leader. Not everyone is going to want to buy into the vision that your students will succeed. There's a very high workload with helping your students to succeed. You'll have to do a lot of differentiation, you'll have to do a lot of research, you'll have to rework your ideas and replan lessons again and again. And there are also going to be difficulties for students outside of school that affect their life in the classroom. So if they don't get fed breakfast that morning, or if their parents get in arguments, or if their heat gets turned off in their house, those are big challenges that are going to creep into the classroom and make it more difficult for them to learn. But despite these great challenges and the challenges that diverse students face every day in their lives, being their teacher is really one of the most, I think, rewarding things you can do with your life. And if you lead in an inclusive way, kids in your classroom really can rise to the challenge and be successful. Thank you.